Good morning, everyone. Today is 10 May 2006. My name is Frank Kastner, and I'm a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of our country's military conflicts, especially World War II. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in those conflicts. Today I'm here at the museum with Corporal John N. Sells. John was a member of the 3rd Marine Division and saw service in the Pacific and training in Southern California. We're going to talk about that training, a little bit about his life, and a number of other things. John, it's a pleasure to have you here. We look forward to hearing your story.
Thank you very much, Frank.
What I'd like you to do first, if you would please, is state your full name and spell your last name for me, please.
Yes, the full name is John Nelson Sells. Last name spelled S-E-L-L-S.
And when and where were you born, sir?
I was born in a small town in Oklahoma named Duvall in June 5th, 1922.
Duvall, that's D-E-V-O-L?
That is correct.
In Oklahoma.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about that town and your parents, your father's and mother's names.
My father his name was John William Sells. And my mother's maiden name was Vivanna Nelson, Vivanna being one name.
Mm-hmm.
They moved from Duvall. My father worked for an oil company in those years, and he moved the family. He was transferred, actually, and moved the family to another town in Oklahoma by the name of Okemah, an Indian name,
Mm-hmm.
of course. We lived there until I reached the age of 4, and that is where some of my very earliest memories took place.
Do you know how your parents met?
No, I do not know. My mother, she was considerably younger than my father, and she was living with an older brother and his wife at the time that she was attending her first year of college. It was a state teachers college located in Ada, Oklahoma. And that's when she and my father met. And I think they were introduced by her older brother with whom she was living.
Do you know where either of them were from originally, or their background?
Only the states of birth. My father was born in Texas, at a small town which no longer exists, called Yantis, Texas.
Wow.
It's about 15 miles perhaps south of Sulphur Springs, Texas. My mother was born in Mississippi, but at the town, in the nearest town, I have no knowledge of.
What are your earliest memories of where you grew up, the small towns?
My earliest memory is, very earliest, is when my dad taught me how to tie my shoes. So he detected that I was walking around with my shoes, dangling shoestrings, in fear that I was going to step and trip. He taught me how to tie my shoes, and I was very proud of the fact.
As you should be.
Yeah.
And it was a very small town?
Yes, a very, very small town. Perhaps 3,000 population at the most in those years.
Is that where you grew up?
No, in about the age of 4 is when my father was transferred again to a town named Drumright, Oklahoma, another oil town, back in the oil boom years. And that's where I remained and grew up, so to speak, until I left and enlisted in the service at the beginning of World War II.
But it was also a fairly small town, I
Yes,
presume?
it was. It was a larger town, 3,500 population. So,
How about schools did you attend? Do you recall the names of any, or?
Yes, in those years, I attended the grade schools that I attended. First was the First Ward School, and elementary school in Drumright.
Mm-hmm.
My second year of school, the second grade, was in the Second Ward School in the town of Drumright. And my third year through the 8th grade was at the Third Ward School in Drumright. Then, of course, going from there, that was in the years where there was no middle schools there. There were elementary schools through the 8th grade. Then from there you went into high school, beginning with the 9th grade, and graduated from Drumright High. Then in 1940, at the end of the 12th grade.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had one brother. My brother had extremely limited educational or schooling through public schools because he was epileptic. And he was not, my mother finally was too discouraged with his condition to continue his public school educations. Consequently, with a teaching background, she continued tutoring him at home.
That must have been a challenge, though.
It was very definitely a challenge. And that was compounded by the fact that she and my father were divorced when I was 10 years old. So that was even presented a greater challenge, and it was kind of devastating to me as a child. But
did you have contact then with both parents, or did you?
Yes, I did. With both parents, I maintained contact with my father, who lived at the opposite side of the small town for a few years thereafter.
Did your mother work then?
And later she did work. She worked and became a secretary to a lady lawyer, a very unusual combination in those years.
At that time, I should say so, yes.
So, anyway, it's during that period of time, working in that particular office building, is when and where she met.
I'll sit this here. Feel free to use it anytime.
An attorney who later became my stepfather. So.
Did you like school? Were you a good student?
I enjoyed school. I excelled basically in the art field. I had a hidden talent that I was totally unaware of until the high school.
Is that a left brain or a right brain, or it's one of those?
It's one of those.
I never knew.
It was right.
What about recreation? What did you do for fun?
We manufactured in those years, Depression years, of course. We manufactured our own toys and own fun. We used to take old, worn-out automobile tires and roll them down the street and chase them, so to speak, down the hill. And we would take, being in the oil field, there would be little remnants, perhaps go anywhere from 1 to 1.5 inches wide, remnants of 8 to 10 inch diameter pipelines that had been cut by a cutter's torch. And we used to build little wooden hoops, and we would roll those things and chase behind those. So we used to play marbles considerably until we would wear out the knees of our pants.
Do you remember things about the effect of the Depression as it came that changed the way you lived?
Yes, I remember the soup lines. The people in town would line up for for food, so-called the soup lines. My father was fortunate in the fact that he remained employed during the days of the Depression. However, he was employed half-time. His job was shared by another, a telephone lineman. And my father would work 3 days a week, and the other fellow would work 3 days a week. So they split their working hours, so to speak, working days.
Do you remember anything about shortages, rationing of any kind, or things that just weren't available? Or
No, I recall absolutely nothing that was not available. Everyone had gardens. We grew vegetables and all types of vegetables. We also had a pig pen. We raised pigs. We butchered in the fall. We also had a cow, and it was my duty to feed and milk the cow. And I even would take the extra milk with me. We'd bottle it. My mother would bottle it, and I would take it down to a small grocery store in town en route to high school and pick up the empty bottles in the old wire bottle rack on the way home. So, but we were never deprived of the necessities. We struggled, of course, but we did not know that we were poor, because everybody else was.
When you're all in the same boat, I guess.
In the same boat.
Yeah. Did you have bicycles?
I remember my first bicycle my first bicycle was I paid 11 cents for, and one of my pups, a litter of one of my dogs.
A bartering system.
So it had a bartering
There
system, absolutely.
Did your parents have cars or a car?
Yes, my father had, still until 1930, he had a 1924 Buick, an old touring car. And of course, in those years, earlier in the late 20s, he had a Model T pickup, which was his work truck. And he, being a telephone lineman, he would have to haul insulators and wire, and of course his telephone and you have to climb poles. There's climbers and tool belt, safety belt. And it's all loaded and transported in his pickup truck. Later, in 1930, he bought my mother a brand new Model A Ford sedan. And it was the first time in the world I had ever had the pleasure of feeling and smelling mohair upholstery.
Something you never forget.
And riding in a car where you could roll the windows up and down. So it was a thrill.
I'm sure. Do you remember learning to drive yourself?
Yes, I do, very, very definitely.
In that car, or?
No, it was following a few years later. My father sold that. He did not sell it. He kept it, but he bought my mother a 1933 Chevrolet, and it was a cream color, and it was very unusual in those years. But that was the automobile that I learned to drive in. And of course I would be sitting on my father's lap, and and he would let me operate the steering wheel, so to speak. That was my first experience of learning to drive.
probably not unlike most of us.
I'm
that's
sure.
true. When you were in high school, were there athletics that you participated in, or things
yes,
that?
I participated all 4 years of my high school years. I went out for football, and I did not play any at all of the varsity until my junior year. In my junior year, I made first team, and it was first team my junior and senior year. So the position I played was center.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, those were grand years in my memories.
I'm sure. What else do you remember from high school? Were there dances? Were there activities?
Oh, yes.
Was it a very big high school?
And we had, in my graduating class, I believe there's about 125 graduates. And gosh, I remember learning to dance. And we'd go to the old. Somebody would have the old 12-inch records of the dance bands and the songs. I remember Saturday night on the radio listening to the very popular Saturday night radio show of all with the latest 10 popular songs of
the hit parade kind
of
thing.
The hit parade, right. But anyway, the girls were very patient with me.
That's good. That's good.
So, but I learned to dance later in the following high school. We would go to the dance bands on Saturday nights over in Tulsa. Tulsa was the largest city nearby, and it was 50 miles away. But we would drive, we'd pack up into 6 of us into a car. We'd pool the monies that we could collect, enough for tickets for the Saturday night dance. We danced to Jimmy Dorsey and Tommy Dorsey, Glenn Miller, Artie Shaw, Kay Kaiser. Oh gosh, the whole group of them.
Those were truly the days.
Oh, say.
You mentioned earlier that you had the milk that you could sell. Did you have odd jobs as you were growing up?
No.
Or did you work at all?
The only odd job that I had, other than chores, was I delivered newspapers on my bicycle. I did that for a period of perhaps a year, and that was not too thrilling at all.
Yeah.
And later on, after I graduated, at one point in my life, when I was the age of 16, that's my new stepfather and I had a little difference of opinion one day, and we tangled, physically tangled. And as a result of that, I got the idea that I could do better if I left home. So I talked another high school friend to leaving home. The two of us hitchhiked up into Kansas, the state of Kansas. Now school was out, and it was basically the heat of summer. The wheat harvest had progressed through Texas and Oklahoma up into the states of Kansas. We thought that we could maybe hire on as a wheat crew, a harvesting crew. We hitchhiked up into an area north of Coffeyville, Kansas, and found employment through some wheat farmers, families in the local area. So we worked most all summer harvesting wheat and they're huge wheat farms. There were 3 different families involved. And we saved, we were so pleased to find that job. It was a sweating hot job.
I can imagine.
And we had no work clothes. The only clothes that we had was what we were wearing, what we had on us. And we had no money. We had, between the 2 of us, we had 25 cents. But when we got into this town, we were told that we would be hired because there was a shortage of help, and these particular families, only one of them had a son, and the other 2 families only had daughters. So they were always in the summer for harvesting crews. They had to hire people. But there should be no problem in hiring on for harvest. And not only that, it was an awfully good year for wheat. And wheat had the price of wheat at that particular time had elevated to 75 cents a bushel, which is a very good high price for wheat. Well, we worked all summer in the wheat fields, and back in those years, the first farmer that hired us, he took us right out to his place, put us up for the night, and then the following day, brought us back into town to buy some. He loaned us the money to buy work clothes. We had to buy long sleeve shirts, and he had old hats that he let us wear, and old gloves. He had enough of those. We didn't have to buy those. But we had to buy work pants and long sleeve work shirts. And that was because you got out in the wheat field in the summer, that dry wheat, and you had to keep your collar buttoned and the cuffs of your long sleeve shirt buttoned. Otherwise, that wheat chaff would get in and just itch you to death. So, but we managed to save. We worked for 20 cents an hour, which was awfully good pay, we thought. But 10 hours a day, it was $2 a day. And being out in the farm all the time, we could only get into town. He would take us into town on Saturday night, and we would, with his family, because they had to do their shopping. And then we would go in, we'd either watch a movie, picture show, or go buy an ice cream cone. Anyway, we had no other means, no other way of spending our money.
And you took your meals with the family?
Yes, they fed us. They put us up on their back porch and on cots, and fed us, of course, and fed us wonderful. I mean, more royally.
Well, working that hard, you'd need to eat.
Indeed, absolutely. But that was all part of the package, room and board. And so on our way back, we went back into Coffeyville, Kansas, and stopped in a J.C. Penney store, my friend and I, and we bought ourselves some other brand new clothes to wear back to go to school. And
did your family know where you were?
Yes, one of the first things we did when we found employment was we wrote I wrote my mother, and he wrote his father. His mother had passed away; she was deceased, and we advised him. We took these penny postcards and advised them as to let them know we were all right, and we were happily employed, and not to worry. Oh, anyway,
those kinds of things were not as uncommon as they are now.
No, they were not uncommon.
And certainly it was much safer to do that
absolutely
kind of thing than in this day and age. Which
without
is
question.
Kind of too bad, maybe.
Yeah, it is. I agree.
But you went back then and went back to school? And
yes, I saved all the money I saved. I bought my mother a brand new Maytag washing machine.
All right.
So, anyway,
what was their reaction to you doing this?
with this
going up there to work and then coming
experience.
back. Yeah.
Their reaction. My mother was very, very happy and thrilled to see me back. Of course.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I got back into town on the bus, I called. I gave her a call from a bus station.
Mm-hmm.
To let her, and I still today remember our old telephone number.
I'll be darned.
So, but anyway, she was very thrilled to hear from me and to know that I was back. But I had to get back in time to, knowing that I had to be back when school was starting.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, I got back just in time. Otherwise, I would not have been able to qualify to play football in my senior year. But anyway, it was.
Did you reconcile with your stepfather at all, or is that?
Yes. We kind of let things blow over, and however, by the time I had finished high school, and my mother was beginning to feel the effects of ill health. And her doctor, physician, so it strongly urged her to make a change in geographic climatic change. So I was at the end of my first year of college. After graduation, I went to 1 year of college. She arranged for me to attend college. With her diligence, she made application through our local congressman, representative, to get me enrolled under the NYA program, which was, in those years, it was called the National Youth Administration, part of the national
the Depression Recovery Program.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And I was accepted, so I left and went to school for a year, and I would work on campus. And the school would furnish me all of the textbooks.
Where was the school?
It was in her old alma mater, Ada, Oklahoma. It was East Central State, a teachers' college in those years. After attending school for a year, I came back to Drumright. And just as at the time my mother was preparing to change her location. And at that time, she moved to Southern California, Los Angeles, as a matter of fact. And
now, with the illness of your brother, did he survive?
He did. He survived.
Was she still?
But by that time,
carrying?
he was placed into a state care hospital in Oklahoma. And I never saw him again until after the World War II was over. But anyway, she.
Your mother had moved to Los Angeles.
She had moved to Los Angeles, and I went back to Drumright. But at that time, she and my stepfather were in the process then of separating and divorcing. So I had no family to return to in Drumright. However, with all of my friends who were there, I roomed with the three other guys who had rented a house, and they were all so-called bachelors. So, and I didn't have employment, but they took me in anyway. So I roomed with them, and I finally was able to secure a small job in an all-night cafe, and Oh, I was, my shift was from included from midnight on until 6 o'clock in the morning. So anyway, I struggled with that, and I was doing that, and up until World War II, until Pearl Harbor.
Now you had mentioned that you had a radio when you lived at home.
Yes.
And as you graduated from high school in 1940. Were you aware of what was going on in Europe at all, in terms of the Germans invading Poland?
Yes,
and the war starting and over there.
I was aware of that. However, at that particular age, I was not keenly, seriously affected.
Yeah. Do you recall talk of our getting involved, or was that a concern to you in terms of your plans to go to college, or?
No, it was not a concern of mine at all. The only concern that I had was, and I do remember that in 1938, the draft began, the United States draft.
The Selective Service.
Yes, Selective Service. And I was keenly aware of the fact that a couple of my high school classmates did volunteer and did join, and both of them joined the Army, as a matter of fact. And but I think they did that primarily because there was no employment available.
No work, right?
So
you went then to school for at least 1 year.
For 1 year. The following semester, I was unable to go back to school. Financially, it was out of the question altogether.
Where were you then on December 7th, 1941?
I had, on December 7th of 41, I had just finished my late night, all
Shift
night,
okay, in the diner.
in the cafe duty, and I was asleep. And when from nearby, I was awakened by the old siren placed atop of the water tower of the town water tank. And the only time that siren is ever sounded is in case of a fire, primarily, and to notify the public that a fire has occurred. So everybody the fire department were all volunteers. And I thought to myself, my God, where is that fire now? And I was ready to roll back over and go back to sleep when one of my roommates burst through the door and hollered, "John, John, turn the radio on. Pearl Harbor has just been bombed." I said, "Pearl Harbor? What's Pearl Harbor? Where's that?" He immediately briefed me where Pearl Harbor was. And God, I couldn't believe it. Oh, I jumped out of bed, immediately dressed. We walked out of the house into about a half a block away to the main street, which was Broadway, of the town, and everybody was rushing out of stores or other places of business or the church even, and gathering on the sidewalks of the main street. And boy, we went from one group to the other, all discussing of what they had heard had been told on the news. And it was just, we were in shock.
Now you're 20 years old.
19.
19, okay.
19.
And did the thought of service immediately occur to you, or did your
No,
classmates?
it immediately occurred to me.
They began to talk about it.
Because as a matter of fact, everybody in those years were so patriotic. There was a rush on to immediately enlist, and I was unable to enlist because of my age, being a minor. And so there was the campaign on to, I remember vividly, later, a few weeks later, join the Marines, avenge Wake Island. And that was a poster that was plastered everywhere. But the Navy was recruiting as well as the Army and the Air Force. And the only other branch of service that really I gave strong consideration to was the Army Air Force. In those years called U.S. Army Air Force.
Right.
And I wrote my mother in California after requesting her permission to enlist, and she first refused, and back and forth. So I finally convinced her, and so with her letter in hand, I hitchhiked from Drumright to Tulsa to enlist in the Marine Corps. And that was on January 30th, on a frigid, cold morning, January 30th
Of
1942.
What did you do during that year? Were you working at the job in Oklahoma?
In Oklahoma, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, from the end of school, the balance of that of the balance of 1941. I continued to work at that little cafe.
Were you surprised at your mother's reaction? That she wouldn't?
I was hopeful that she would immediately grant me permission to enlist, but in retrospect, I can understand perhaps why she was reluctant to do so. It's because of her other son. That I, being her only healthy, so-called healthy son, and I could understand her reluctance to do that. But I kept appealing to her with hoping, to convince her to give me permission, which she ultimately did.
And your decision for the Marine Corps?
All came about during that poster.
Okay.
Avenge Wake Island.
So the recruiting posters do work.
They do work.
All right. So now this was then, you were actually inducted into service on January 31st in 1942, or
Yes, that's
you were
correct.
sworn in.
Right.
And then what
I was enlisted in Tulsa. They put me up, the recruiting office there, Marine Corps recruiting office, put me up in a hotel overnight. And they fed me breakfast in this particular hotel also the following morning. And and gave me dinner that evening. And then I met another fellow then the following morning at the recruiting office. And he was there with his father, who was seeing him off on the bus that we boarded together at the recruiting office to be transported from there to Oklahoma City. And that's where he and I became friends. First became friends on the bus. And coincidentally, we remained in the same outfit all through the war years. So it was very...
Do you remember, and his name?
His name was Tom Segnor, Segnor. And he was from a neighboring town, or you might call it a suburb of Tulsa, called Sand Springs, Oklahoma. But his father was there, living nearby. His father was there to see him off. And I, at the time, I remember wishing my dad was there to see me off too.
I can imagine. Yeah.
But by that time, my dad had moved and had been transferred to a town in Texas. So he was unaware of all of this negotiation with my mother. So anyway,
What were your feelings at that point of getting on that bus? Were you?
I was anxious to get on, to get on into service. I had no idea what boot camp was like, what was awaiting me in San
Had you had
Diego.
any contact with any classmates that had gone before you into the service, or their
No.
families, or heard anything?
No, I hadn't. No. So many of my classmates were had by that time had continued on with their school. Had entered their second year of college or university, and the others, a couple of the other fellas, had found employment with a aircraft company in Wichita, Kansas, and a couple of others had found with the aircraft company in Tulsa. So I felt very fortunate in having such a outstanding jobs. So
And in the support of the defense industry, so they were doing
yes,
in their
indeed.
part as well.
Yeah.
Where did you go then for your basic training?
We were sent to San Diego. We were from Oklahoma City is where we underwent our physicals and further examinations. We were placed aboard a train then, my friend Tom and I. And there were other Marines, recruits that we met in Oklahoma City. And however, I never befriended any of them. But anyway, we were placed aboard a train and ended up through the states of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and Southern California, ending up in San Diego. And that's where the Marine, what they call the Marine Corps Recruit Depot was located, MCRD. And there was boot camp. And so after 10 weeks of boot camp, a new world was awakened to a new world.
Oh, I imagine. Just one backtracking question. Your family obviously had, your mother was in Los Angeles and your dad had moved away. Were you in contact with anybody from your hometown or any family during the war at all? Or was there a girlfriend or
Yes,
somebody that...
there was a girlfriend. As a matter of fact, there were two girls that I wrote to. And one of them was a real strong girlfriend. I wrote to her religiously, you might say. As a matter of fact, I guess you would call her my first love, so to speak.
Yeah.
And anyway, we wrote back and forth.
Did it help dealing with what you were going through to have somebody like that you could write to and receive things from occasionally?
Oh, yes, indeed, it did. It helped immensely. It was extremely important to have that close contact, and particularly with news, also keeping me apprised of goings on in the old hometown, so to speak. Yeah, it was
You need that
very,
connection somehow.
Absolutely, very important.
And again, not having the family that a lot of other people did.
Exactly.
Have you stayed in touch with her at all, or?
No, I've stayed in touch with her until toward the end of the war, and she went away then. She left Drumright and went away to school out of state. And during the time that she was enrolled in this out-of-state school, she met someone else. Ultimately, married him. So.
Okay, getting back to boot camp. What was boot camp like for you?
It was another world altogether. I remember the first thing that we were told. I don't care to repeat the language that I was introduced to, but some terms I had never heard before in my life, but very explicit.
Yes.
Anyway, I remember we were told we were nothing but scum,
Mm-hmm.
and to empty our pockets of everything that we owned, including any rings of anything, and put them all into a bag and list our home address on the bag. Well, I had no home address at that particular point.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I was nevertheless stripped of every conceivable item. The only thing I had left was my name, so, and social security number. we were escorted to the barber shop, so to speak. It's more like a shearing shop.
Yes, yes.
Anyway, God, I remember this old the guy with the clippers in his hand. Okay, he was flipping ashes off his cigarette. Okay, Sonny, how would you like yours?
Like you had a choice.
Yes. I remember those old hot clippers still going over my scalp. Still hot from that.
Yes. How were your drill instructors? What were they like?
Oh, the DIs, I'm telling you, they were next to God. Oh man, they were as tough as you could ever expect to encounter.
But then going through what you did, you needed that, I think.
Absolutely, that was psychologically that was a part of the whole training.
Mm-hmm.
As you forget who you are, and they build you from the ground up into what they want you to be, which is the proper way. It's a way to militarize a unit, and particularly the psychology of the individual.
So that you identify with the unit rather than an individual, because
Yes, indeed.
it's
Exactly.
the unit that must survive in order for the individual.
Yes, absolutely.
To survive.
However, we were taught to take care of ourselves. So only because take care of yourselves first, because you're no good to your buddy unless you can help yourself. So anyway, that was the training program.
Because you were a football player, did that make the physical part of it easier, or were there some who didn't make it?
Perhaps it made it a little easier. I was more accustomed to the calisthenics part of the training, although there were other physical aspects of the training that I had never had before, and but it was all very interesting introduction. We would have to run, it being the Marine Corps base there, boot camp being so close to the bay, San Diego Bay. It was about a mile away. We would have to take our pails or buckets, as we called them, and run to the bay and run back. And that pail better have at least be half filled with water by the time you got back. And the last three guys back go again.
I'll be darned.
So anyway, that was part of the torture, so to speak.
So when you finished that 10 weeks, did you get a chance to go back home, or did you get leave, or
No. We
where did you go next?
the final 2 weeks was in the rifle range and shooting primarily, and and in those years we still had the old bolt action, the 03 so-called Springfield rifles before the M1s were introduced.
Were you a pretty good shot? Is that
Not especially. I did. I just gained marksman as a so-called badge, and not sharpshooter, and certainly not expert. However, when it came to pistol, I did become sharpshooter with pistol. So anyway, I learned very quickly that you don't over oil your rifle, particularly in the bolt end. You know, you get a little too much oil in that, and it'll splatter back into your aiming eye.
Oh, ouch.
So
That would be a painful lesson.
oh, indeed. But every once in a while, if you missed the target altogether at 600 yards, you'd get a big red flag above the target. We called it Maggie's drawers.
Okay, I remember
So,
that.
Remember that?
Yes, I remember that.
So, oh boy.
So where did you go after that? What was your next level of training?
Well, we went from there. We were shipped up to Camp Elliott, which is a Marine Corps camp just at the north end of San Diego, and it's alongside the old Highway 395. And we trained there from, I guess it must have been April until September. And at that time, Camp Pendleton was being built. And by that point, or that time in September, Camp Pendleton, enough had been finished that we marched then from Camp Elliott up 395. It's a 50 some odd mile hike, and it took us a little over 2.5 days to march, and there were a few thousand of us marched up to occupy Camp Pendleton when it first to open it, to occupy it, first occupy.
So you were one of in the first group?
In the first group to occupy, right.
Outstanding.
As a matter of fact, we being telephone linemen, telephone communications, it was our job to string telephone lines, a twisted pair, combat wire, from the regimental switchboard to our battalion switchboard, and then from the battalion switchboard to different company barracks. So here we're out there climbing power poles, tying up strands of wire for telephone.
Talk a little bit about how those decisions were made in terms of you ending up in that particular job assignment. Was that a choice, or was it just assigned to you?
No, it was. We were called out into ranks from temporary barracks to line up for selection, not totally select, but for assignments. But we were asked for any so-called qualifying background. My friend Tom, he had 1 year of school already, also in University of Tulsa, but he wanted to be an accountant. So he had a so-called somewhat of a little bit of a business background. His father was a timekeeper for a Standard Oil Company, and that was the same oil company that my dad worked for. But anyway, Tom ended up as an office clerk. It was his choice. Well, under questioning of the platoon information, the question was asked about telephones. Well, it so happened that I knew, and Tom was standing next to me, and I told Tom, I said, God, I know the answer to that question, but I had learned that through my dad, because I used to play with his old telephones, and he taught me a little bit about them, even when I at that young age. So anyway, I stepped forward, one step forward. So consequently, and a couple of other guys did as well. consequently, we were assigned to a telephone communications outfit.
So it isn't just entirely random, one,
In-
two,
in
three,
that
four.
case,
Sometimes they
no.
do try to.
If there was also a major there trying to recruit personnel for what he called Carlson's Raiders, a Raider battalion. Now, some of the guys, thought that would be somewhat glamorous, and they stepped forward for that. But after I had already been pulled out of ranks to become part of the telephone group. So anyway, that's how that ended up. Now, all the others, I have to assume, ended up as a rifleman. So.
Was there any additional training then specifically for the position in a communications company?
Oh yes, definitely. We have had very specific training pertaining to telephone. As a matter of fact, pertaining to communications, period. But our specialty was telephone. And we were sent to San Diego for, I believe, if I remember correctly, 2 weeks for a telephone school. And there we learned more of the technical aspects of telephone and telephone communications.
And field.
And the field end of it we learned then in training back at camp.
Okay.
And also in climbing poles. So we had to learn radio to a certain level. At least how to change the batteries in a radio, and how to we had to learn Morse code. And radio had to concentrate on Morse code with the keys. And we had to do the same thing. We had to learn to send and receive Morse code by key, and also by blinker gun. It was about a 3S diameter tube with a stock and a trigger on it, and the trigger you had to either dot dash,
like you see on the ships
with a
did.
light,
Yeah.
through the tube, a battery operated little light, and on the shipboard is the same thing, and we could read messages later, shipboard messages, but we had to learn that, and then we had to learn semaphore. That was another method of communication. And it was a little later we were introduced to the code talkers once they came in and joined our ranks.
And they were Marines, yes.
They were Marines, yes. All Navajo code talkers. And we couldn't imagine what the heck the secrecy was, because they'd go all to themselves in their little training sessions. Oh, we also had to learn the use of field. I can't recall the name of the instrument now, but a little rotary cartridge, little wheels on it. They're little code instruments. We had to learn
like
how
a cipher machine.
Yes,
kind of
right,
thing,
exactly.
It's interesting because we just got a new softcover book on the Navajo code talkers, and the point they made throughout that book is that while they had this skill, they were going to be Marines first. So they all went through basic training and all of that and became Marines, and then they incorporated their skills. And it was a remarkable skill.
Indeed.
You wonder if we could have gotten through, some of the operations as successfully as we did with, if we had to broadcast that in something that could have been broken, and
right.
they never did break it.
They never did.
That was
Never did.
It is a
Yes,
remarkable
as a matter of
story.
fact, I also have 2 different publications of the code talkers. published.
We'd be interested in copies because there's material that's not easy to find.
No, I'm sure it isn't.
There isn't a great deal out there. That's why we were eager to get this book. I'll show it to you when we finish. I think you'll be interested.
I have it.
You may.
As a matter of fact, however, my copy has I don't know how many autographs.
Oh, that's terrific.
Of the co-talkers.
I need to take a minute and change the tape in here.
Oh,
if you want to just relax a second and
Sure.
grab a drink. Okay, we were just talking about the Navajo Code Talkers and your experience with them. What other kind of training then did you have, and when did you learn about perhaps where you were going overseas?
We in December of '42, we learned that we were going to be shipped out. But we were also going to be given 2-week furloughs in preparation prior to being shipped out. So I went back to Drumright on my 2-week furlough. Went back and hooked up with a girlfriend who at that time was enrolled in the University of Oklahoma. She was home for the Christmas holidays, and we hooked up and spent a few happy evenings together. And I made myself comfortable in one of the local in Ruby's a boarding house.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway,
How were you received back home now that you were in the Marines and
I was received very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, all the service guys were received well.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't the only one back at home at that time.
Uh-huh.
I was the only Marine that at that particular time
Mm-hmm.
back home, but there were several guys there in the Air Force
Mm-hmm.
and Navy as well. And but the townspeople welcomed us with open arms. God, we were invited for dinners, so we were.
That's nice.
Oh, it was very, very nice.
Yes.
And God, they even wanted to send us home with cookies, and
Mm-hmm.
so. Anyway, on my way back, however, the furlough was over. Took the bus back to Oklahoma City, boarded the train, and there I met 3 other Marines coming back to the L.A. area, Camp Hilton, and they were from Arkansas, but they happened to be on in the same coach of the train, and they all they were sent home by one of them's granddaddy. They were all 3 sent home with a fruit jar
Mm-hmm.
full of white lightning. So we had a very good, happy time.
Nobody remembers
all the
anything?
way back.
That's good.
I
That's
remember we're partying with the guys at the Union Station there in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
So they went one way and I went the other. It was great.
I'm sure. So when you went back to Camp Pendleton?
Yes, I went back to Camp Pendleton. My mother was in Los Angeles, and so I went to spend the night with her, and the day before I went back to Camp Pendleton.
And then what happened when you got back to camp?
Well, it was near at the beginning, almost the beginning of a new year, and we were all then in the midst of getting all of our gear together, communications gear, and getting packed up and ready to ship out.
Mhm.
So it was in the following month, then we all got word that we were going to be boarding ship. We were trucked then from Oceanside at Camp Pendleton down to San Diego to the harbor. And there we boarded a very large Pacific Ocean liner, converted to a troop transport, so to speak. It's still the old staterooms were still fixed in the ship, but to the bulkheads of the staterooms were welded fold-down bunks, and the U.S. Navy style. So anyway, there were six guys to a stateroom, 6 Marines. It was the USS. Oh gosh, let's see, what was the name? I think it was called the USS United States, if my memory serves me correctly.
I know there was a ship by that name, but yeah, we can look that up.
Yeah, okay.
But you missed the Liberty ship then. You had a little better deal.
Oh, yes. Well, as a matter of fact, my first time ever aboard ship was during field exercises, even while we were still in Camp Elliott. And we were on practice amphibious landings. We were sent, we were trucked over to the harbor in San Diego and boarded the USS President Adams. It was one of the ships of the old President lines. And we sailed out around Point Loma in San Diego, up the coast to the north end of La Jolla. And there we transferred down cargo nets into Higgins boats and invaded North La Jolla. And that was quite an exercise. And there were Marine photographers taking photographs, of all of our activities, so to speak, training films. And here we put in our most rugged stance that we could develop, and climbing up these cliffs, and getting up, and we get to the top, and here are the citizens out there with little bags of cookies, waiting to treat us. Oh boy. Well, back in camp, as a result of the filming that exercise, we learned that we had a hell of a lot to learn about amphibious landings. All the do's and don'ts.
Yeah. Did you have any problem with seasickness?
No, I never did. I've never, of all of my different times aboard ship or craft, different ocean crafts, I've never experienced seasickness whatsoever. But on this, on our main ship going over, when we left in January of '43, we sailed out of the harbor and headed overseas and unescorted. And there must have been, gosh, I don't know, there must have been 8,000 to 10,000 troops aboard that ship. It's a huge ship. It took up the entire length of the berth. But within just a few hours, the rails were lined with guys losing their breakfast. Anyway, we as I mentioned, sailed unescorted from there to New Zealand, and it took us 14 days to get to New Zealand. But we were told, we underwent different abandoned ship drills and on the way, en route. But we were also told that the ship would take a zigzag course. And at 14 knots, which was the cruising speed of this particular ship, it was faster than any Japanese submarine. So we didn't have to worry about, we shouldn't worry too much about submarines. The ship was also armed at a 5-inch gun in the bow on deck, and all kinds of anti-aircraft, those pom-poms everywhere. So it was pretty well outfitted, I think.
What were conditions like on the ship? I mean, obviously crowded, but
Very, very crowded. The 6 men to a so-called stateroom. We were issued cards for mess, and we only had something like a 20-minute period for mess. And at that time, a horn would blow. We would have to get up and vacate the tables, for the next crew to come in and be served, or I shouldn't say be served, but through their buffet, the line, their trays. And we had a regular routine. We'd take our empty trays and dunk them into barrels of soapy water. Anyway.
Was the food pretty good?
Yeah, the food was reasonably good. And you imagine trying to feed that number of troops from one galley, so to speak.
And I suspect it was a little boring because even though you had training there, a lot of time has to just be
That's
passed
true.
just
Absolutely.
with very little to do.
Very, very boring. We would share books and a few magazines that were pretty dog-eared by the time you'd get to me, But anyway, and one of the popular magazines in those years with the Marines was called the magazine called the Leatherneck. So that was always a favorite magazine with the Marines. But we had an awful lot of time to spend reading, and then we undergo different drills aboard ship.
When did you actually learn your duty station for battle? You went to New Zealand first, but
Yes, we went to New Zealand first. We went there, as we were told, primarily as a defense group for New Zealand. We were in North Island, New Zealand, landed in Auckland, and we were camped about 20 miles south of Auckland. It had been an Anzac, or a Kiwi, what we called Kiwi, a military camp, and we were housed there, and we were trained out of there.
did you know what was going on in the Pacific area at the time? Did you get
Pretty much,
news or-
yes, well, pretty much so. We were pretty well apprised of news.
And in spite of some of the urgency, because there was a time when things were not going really well for us.
Exactly.
Were you surprised at how long the training took?
We thought it was extremely long training period. We were very anxious to get into combat and to have this situation turned around. So we were extremely anxious and were bored with training. It became very enamored, so to speak.
Yet when you finally got in combat situations, did that make you realize the importance of that training?
Yes,
or-
indeed it did. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we sailed then from New Zealand after being there for 5 months. We landed there in February of '43, and after 5 months, we sailed from there up to Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, and we got there reasonably late in the day. So down the cargo nets, the side again. Oh no! And that particular ship was called the old USS American Legion. It was an old ship, and we hit a storm on the way up. And that thing, you're going to hear those seams creak and groan, and was waiting for the rivets to start popping. So, but we arrived at Guadalcanal late in the day, and down the cargo nets into Higgins boats. And we were told as soon as we got to the beach to dig in. It was becoming dusk. My first stark introduction to war was in digging my foxhole near the beach, under the scrub brush type, alongside of the area that I started digging was a shoe, and it was a military a shoe, the same military as a Marines or Navy, or the Navy Air Force, Marine Air Force used, or all the shoes were all the same, all suede, high top. Well, anyway, I picked up the shoe, and here it still had a foot in it. So, God, I said, well, welcome to combat. So I continued to dig my foxhole to dig in. And the following morning, when I filled in my foxhole in, I buried the shoe at that time.
Wow.
But that was a very stark introduction.
I can imagine, and that would be something you'd remember.
Well, my friend Tom, he was in a little bit different area, but as we started, the following morning, as we started marching up this so-called coconut farm road, harvesting road, toward these the coconut groves, I told him about it. He said, well, I just talked to a guy earlier this morning. He said he found an arm. And he said on the hand of the arm was still a ring. And he said he took the ring off. He told me he took the ring off and examined it. And it was a University of Kansas ring. And the guy's initials were inside, on the inside of the ring. He said he's going to try to look it up, look the guy up, his family, when he gets back, if he gets back.
Yeah.
I said, God, I don't know whether I would have the guts to do that or not.
I don't know.
I'd hate to tell his mother or his sister or girlfriend,
Yeah.
maybe his wife.
Yes.
Yeah,
you never know.
No.
What was your first true combat experience then?
The first true combat experience was the invasion of Bougainville, farther up in the Solomon Island group.
Now, Guadalcanal, we all associate with kind of one of the first real successful actions, although it took a long time to secure it.
Right.
Was it relatively secure by the time you got there, or could you move around fairly comfortably?
It was reasonably secure by the time we arrived there, yes. We were still undergoing, we would still be visited almost nightly by what we call Washing Machine Charlie.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. And he would always pay us a visit about the same time every night. And but he would never drop more than two bombs. But he was our first unit casualty was inflicted by him. But we never underwent any combat from the ground. After that, we went to went down near Henderson Field at the airport. There is where the main docks were. I shouldn't say docks, but the main landing area for LSTs. LSTs were the craft that brought in most of the supplies to the island. And they would come right up and beach to the beach and drop their ramp.
Now, were they larger than the Higgins boats?
Oh, yes, they were considerably larger. The LST is the Navy's designation for landing ship tank.
Oh, okay.
and it was truly a ship. It had a hold in it, and then the deck on top. But that's what, you know, they would transport tanks and larger vehicles. So, but there we underwent it was down near Henderson Field, and we would stay overnight in bunkers that surrounded the airport, the field, the Henderson Field. And there one night, we could, in the morning, we could see our aircraft take off, or bombers. And we had all kinds of B-24s. I didn't see any 17s there at all at that time. I saw the B-26 or A-26, you know, and the 24s. But we'd see those, you know, big, all lumbersome 24s take off in the morning. Yeah. And by the time they got back, we would be finished our work party and back in our bunkers. And here they would be coming back. My God, they had 1 or 2 engines dead in them, or maybe their tail half shot off, or damaged wings. You know, God, what? And you'd wondered, God, if they were lucky to get back.
How'd they stay in the air? Yes.
Yeah, also.
But when you talk to those guys, they, you know, those things could fly just practically in pieces. They
Yeah,
were, you know,
isn't
they
that
were
the
just
truth?
very, very reliable.
Right.
What were your duties
Well,
when you say you were working? What kind of things did you do?
Well, at that particular location, at that time, we were there on work parties, strictly to unload these LSDs, strictly to unload provisions. And there were all kinds of provisions, armament, and there was also food stuff as well, all kinds, everything. And while we were there one night, there, 2 Japanese bombers came over. And we knew they were coming because of the sirens. And the radar had picked them up. And so the sirens were sounded down around the field, or down on the field. So we knew they were headed this way. And then just before long you could hear them, the drones of the engines. And they'd get close to the airfield, and you wonder, and then we heard one of our planes warming up down on the field.
You could tell the difference?
Yes, we could, and this was real close. This our plane right close to us on the field. We hear him warming up, and then we heard him take off. It was dark, of course. We had no idea. And suddenly, our big floodlights came on, and they pinpointed a bomber. It flooded this bomber with light. He dropped a stick of bombs, and we kept wondering, why the hell don't they start shooting at that guy, you know? And just immediately after that, here we saw a bunch of the phosphorus a stream of bullets, you know, from below the plane, and it was our plane climbing directly up under that bomber, and with all the tracers and everything. God, he just riddled that bomber, and he's sitting in it, burst into flame. And boy, we applauded like you wouldn't believe. And pretty soon, here came the second bomber. That same thing happened. He dropped his first stick of bombs, and it's the same thing. And it was what we learned later. It was a Black Widow. Our plane was a Black Widow. It climbed straight up into this plane and shot him down. We heard both planes crash in the distance in the mountains with the other half of their bomb load.
Wow.
Boy, oh boy.
Just like the 4th of July.
Yes, it was. It truly is the best of 4th of July you can imagine.
Yes. What were their bombing target? How were the bombs close to you that they dropped?
They were
trying to hit the airfield?
They were just the airfield. Is what they were bombing. Strictly the airfield.
When did you get back into communication work, or did you move out from there?
That work party only lasted 2 or 3 days. I don't remember exactly, all of the outfits, it was our turn for, the work party, so we were all mustered down to go down there to the field. And we were, I don't know, this Coconut Grove where we were permanently, you might say permanently housed.
That's one of the, you had a picture showing
Yes.
that with the tents in the coconut
Exactly.
area. Yeah.
Yeah. That was probably 3 or 4 miles from the airport.
Now, when you did work like this or around that camp, did you have to post guards? Did you have guard duty?
No, we
It was
had
secure enough that.
it was secure enough that we had no guard duty assignments whatsoever. The only thing we had to be concerned about was the winds. We string our telephone wires between coconut trees, and of course they lean slightly with the prevailing winds, in the direction of the prevailing winds. But if high winds would come and they'd start swaying, they'd put too much tension on our lines and break them. So we had to leave a lot of sag in our lines, and we would tie them with loose knots around the trunks of the trees.
So what was your next assignment then? Where did you go from? Did you leave Guadalcanal? Or?
Yeah, we left Guadalcanal for another training exercise, which we were becoming quite disgusted with. We boarded the old USS Adams again and sailed down into the New Hebrides Islands, a group of islands. And we were there for a week on landings, daily, different types of daily landings, strictly in training exercises, and just actually getting ready. It was a prelude, you might say, to our first combat landing, which we were not sure of at the time. But once we reboarded the ship, we sailed in, and as a small group convoy, escorted by a couple of destroyers. And we met another group of ships, escorted by 2 other destroyers. And it was quite a force, quite a landing force. We didn't know it at the time, but my outfit was the 9th Marines, 3rd Division, 9th Marine Regiment. Well, that outfit, as it turned out, was the 3rd Marines, 3rd Regiment, 3rd Division. They were coming from a different group of islands altogether. So anyway, we converged and sailed as a convoy, as a landing force, then into Bougainville. And it was November 1st of 1943. And I'd like to point out that it was November 1st, and in conflict to one of your dates posted down on the wall.
Oh, okay.
So
We'll go take a look at that. All right.
Anyway.
This is in the hangar?
Yes.
Okay. So this landing was under true combat conditions?
Yes,
then?
it was true combat conditions. We were again by Higgins post down the cargo nets, and I was assigned to one of the rifle companies, I Company, and I was a corporal, and PFC helper of mine was the 2 of us were assigned to I Company. There was a corporal and a PFC assigned to each one of the rifle companies. I was assigned to I Company, and my partner and I had this big 64-pound reel of wire, and it had a little ball-bearing type of axle that went through the reel. And we had field telephones strapped over my shoulder, and we also had a 6-foot pole, just a 1-inch diameter pole, with a flag, a white, in our case, a white flag tied to the end of it. Well, when we hit the beach, I'd landed with a company commander, and as we hit the beach, I planted this pole in the sand on the beach, with a white flag, indicating that that's where I Company, the white flag meant I Company, and then we tied the wire around the pole, the stick, and then we followed on inland, following the company commander, paying out wire off the reel. And
Now, what was this connected to?
nothing as yet.
Nothing is okay.
No, it's just the bare ends of wire. But when battalion headquarters lands now, they were about 2 or 3 waves behind us. By the time they land, then they send out runners down and up in both directions of the beach to these red, white, or blue flags, and with wire, and splice onto that, and pay out wire then back to headquarters, to battalion headquarters company, to the battalion commander. And it'll be a 6-drop, a 6-unit little field switchboard there. So then he's in telephone communications and to the different company commanders. After, once the commanders establish their command post. So, and that's where we are. And me with a I Company commander, and then I tied my splice on and tied my telephone terminal to the telephone terminals of the wire.
Now, to someone who's never been through that, that sounds like a pretty sophisticated set of circumstances to get everything coordinated, yet it seemed to work.
It works fine. There are certain things with telephone that two wires, there are 2 terminals on a telephone, and any telephone. There are 2 types of electrical impulses by a telephone. One, if you turn the crank on a field telephone, you rotate an armature within permanent coils. And with each revolution of that, or half revolution, it creates a magnetic current called AC. But that's alternating current, AC. Now that is what rings the bell of a telephone, or back of the switchboard, causes that little magnetic latch to open and drop a drop on the switchboard. And then there is in the telephone and in the switchboard there is also batteries. Then it's DC, and that it's modulating DC is what the speaking current is through a telephone. It's the the metal diaphragm that it resonates with your
creates
voice.
The voice.
Yes.
Effect.
And now, if you're trying to ring on the AC on the telephone, trying to ring somebody, and that thing just spins with no resistance whatsoever, you know that that line has been interrupted altogether. So, but if it, it's an open current or open conductor. It's been broken somehow or cut. But if it turns with heavy resistance, extremely hard resistance, then you know that the 2 wires have been shorted together at some point. Well, we know if that happens, if that occurs, we know exactly what to do on each end. We know that those lines have been somehow shorted, tied together. So we'll take both ends, both wires in, and connect to one of the telephone terminals, and take a short piece of wire then and connect to the other telephone terminal and to our bayonet. And then we'll stick that bayonet into the ground. Then we've got a a current, a return path for the current.
I'll be darned.
Now that's all comes with our training.
Yeah.
You know, that's all part of it.
And that communication is very, very important under
Absolutely,
circumstances like that.
exactly, because the only alternative communication was radio, and of course that's all voice. In under combat condition, it's all voice communication, and so that's always, and it's all messages are conducted generally in English, you know. So
Now, when you're doing this, I mean, you're carrying all this equipment. You're also armed
yes, we're also armed.
because you are a rifleman.
Yes, on Bougainville we were armed with what is called a rising gun. Many people are not familiar with that term whatsoever. A rising gun was a short barrel gun. It had a pistol grip on the end of it, and it had, in our case, had a wire stock that folded up against the barrel of the weapon, and it had a 25 round, 45 caliber clip, spring fed clip, and it had a little selector switch near the top of the chamber. It's either safety, or semi-automatic, or fully automatic. So it's either, you know, like a fully automatic short barrel weapon, or selectively single, you know. And that's what we were armed with. It had a sling. We could sling it over our shoulder, but we didn't like that weapon because in the brush, in the jungle, you never knew where that little selector switch on that thing was located. You know, it's so easily to select from fully automatic to safety or back and forth that, you know, with us carrying that thing and carrying a real wire and telephone, mostly that thing was in our hand, in one hand, while we were paying out wire with the other. There were two men on the reel. But going through all that brush in that jungle, you never knew what
Could
position.
easily get moved from one
Yeah,
position
you
to the other.
didn't know what position that switch was in. Now that was in Bougainville. You know, that's how we were armed. Later I traded weapons because I didn't like that feature. And a little later, when the Navy CBs came ashore with their heavy equipment, bulldozers, and it started creating a landing strip for fighter planes. They had all their equipment out there. Well, they were armed with rifles, and they were very cumbersome for a bulldozer operator, you know. So I traded him. I traded my rising gun and ammunition clips for his M1. And so weren't supposed to do that, of course, but anyway, did it anyway.
They didn't. Yeah. So what was, you were under fire then at this time, or did you?
Yes, we were a Japanese landing party, and on our left flank, we anchored our perimeter to the beach. Our company did. And coming, down on our right flank is where most of the resistance occurred, land resistance. And we didn't have too much land resistance, but we then, on our first day landing, we were strafed by two Japanese Zeros. And boy, this one guy, jeez, I saw him. You could. We were in swamps, right next to swamps, and had to go through them. But you could see all of the, swamp water, just all of the splashing with the air around that came through these strafing attack. And this one Marine, God, he saw him grab his groin, you know, and God, he screamed. And my partner and I ran over to help him, and we called for a corpsman. Navy corpsman was the medic of our Marines. So I helped cut the guy's dungarees off. God, he was bloody. It's really a mess. And corpsman came over and did what he could to bandage him up and give him a shot of morphine, you know. But this guy, he had no tentacles left, you know. Man, it was a mess. And I told my helper, and I said, God, let's get the hell out of here while we've still got our balls.
Yes, I guess.
So, oh man. Then the following day, a Japanese landing force sailed down the coast in barges. And a Navy reconnaissance plane spotted them and advised us the fact that they were, that you know, we were going to be under attack, that they were there. So there must have been, I don't know, 250, 300 troops, Jap troops. And they came down and we made contact with our front lines. But we knew that they were coming, so our so-called front lines was kind of an ambush, you might say. So once they made contact, well, the Japs began to dig in. Well, our guys pulled right back to our real front lines then. So I had telephone, I was switchboard duty there at battalion headquarters at the time, and I heard our battalion commander discussing tactics with our artillery commander, and they had the 75 millimeter field guns and our 80 millimeter mortars, and anyway, once those Japs they had all dug in, we started opening up with artillery and mortar rounds. And that's when we almost annihilated them, all of them, without any casualties of our own to speak of. And I remember examining them then once that was over, and got what they overhearing them discuss the tactics. I knew that artillery were timed bursts were timed for ground explosion, impact explosion, whereas the mortars were timed for tree bursts. Once it just hit a treetop, they would burst, and that I think probably did more damage than the ground bursts because of concussions. Because these Japs were dug in, and you got so many of them were dead. Just you could see their heads are swollen and blue, you know, from old blood in there. But anyway, that was my first encounter with a personal encounter with in combat. Was as a result of that, some of the Japs had escaped in that bombardment and were trying to make their way one way or the other. But I had to go out and follow. We started landing a lot of heavy equipment onto the beach, and I thought, God, they're going to tear up my telephone line with all of those bulldozers and tanks and stuff coming ashore. So anyway, I violated one of the rules that I was never supposed to violate, and it went out to search damage of a telephone line by myself. I always supposed to have a partner with you, whatever you did. And I was so sure that a line was torn up or down right on the beach, all the heavy equipment rolling across it. Well, that wasn't the case. So I followed my telephone line back into a particular area, and there was a little pod of coconut trees there that have been there for years, I guess, washed ashore, you know, and from years previously. And the natives had harvested coconuts from it, and it was pretty well surrounded by open area around the coconut trees. And as I entered that area, at that time I still had my rising gun. But when that occurred, God, here it is. I was surprised. I was following telephone line, concentrating on that. I had my rising gun in my right hand, but and I had a telephone slung over across my shoulder, and God, that's when the form dropped down out of this coconut tree, just hit the ground, and got it 10 or 12 feet in front of me, and it scared the hell out of me, and I immediately recognized it as a Jap. But God, I took that rising gun and leveled it at, and it just automatically fired. And thank God it was on semi-automatic. So anyway, boy, I don't know how many rounds I put in, but I was so stunned, so shocked, that I just kept expending rounds into this dead body. Well, he managed to get one round off. I learned in a few minutes later. And boy, here's some guys from I Company, a squad of guys, came to find out, investigate what the hell all of this fire was behind them. So as they entered this little open area where I was, I'd crawled back in the underbrush by then, thinking maybe this guy had a partner somewhere. God, when they, our own Marines came in to view, I identified myself and said, sure glad to see you guys show up. Anyway, when they all started heading back, and one of the guys in the squad said, "Here, I'll give you a hand." And I was going through all of the remains, the pack of this Jap soldier, and everything was blood everywhere. But I went through his pack and his pockets and his clothes, and I took all of the stuff back with me. I used his canteen to wash the blood off of my hands, and I finally found the wire, or the short in the wire. But this Marine, I said, "Here, would you like a cigarette?" I was still shaking so much. I said, "Could sure use one." So as we bent over to light our cigarettes, he said, "God, what happened to your telephone?" I looked at my telephone that was slung over that damn corner of my field telephone had been shot away.
For heaven's sakes.
God, leather case and all. Oh my God. And I tried to turn the crank up, and he wouldn't turn at all. Oh well. I had to go. I just followed him back to his I Company command post to use their phone. You know, after I found that wire, what had happened, this Jap with his bayonet or something had stripped the insulation on both wires. So,
But better the telephone than you.
boy, tell me, I'll say. Oh, man. Well, I had some explaining to do when I got back to my to my unit. Oh, God. I never went out again without a partner.
By yourself, no. So where did you go? Continue with what happened then, and
Well, from that point on, we advanced a considerable distance farther farther inland to establish quite a perimeter of defense perimeter to defend this airfield that the CBs.
and this is on
This is on Bougainville.
Bougainville.
Right. Well, we got up into the ridges then, establish our perimeter of defense up there. And by that time, the field had been expanded enough that they could land bombers there also. But by that time, also, I contracted malaria, and my partner was assigned to help me back to the sick bay, so to speak, back down to the beach. So I was in sick bay, and this was at the end of December of '43, and I was weak, just weak as could be. And anyway, I noticed a lot of activity taking place down on the beach itself. So I inquired of the Navy corpsman there in the sick bay what was going on. He said everybody's getting ready to board ship again and being relieved by the Army, and we were going boarding ship. They didn't know where to at the time, but anyway, that's when I said adios. He said, "You're not released yet." Bye. So I found my outfit as they were boarding Higgins boats again. So I boarded Higgins boats and went back out to board his ship. By the time I got up that top of that cargo net, though, I could barely get over the rail. I was so weak. Malaria is devastating. It really leaves you in a weakened condition. Well, we ended up back in Guadalcanal with R&R. And then after there, a few months undergoing reestablished training exercises, we boarded ship again and again, the old USS Adams. So we headed from there up into the Kwajaleins, and that's the Marshall Islands, Kwajalein, and those atolls in there. And there we transferred from troop ship down into LSTs, and they were already boarded, had heavy equipment already down in the hold, and other motorized equipment on deck, and that's where we stayed. It was up on deck underneath the different vehicles, or inside of them. And our next up, this when we're launched our campaign for landing for Guam. Well, in the meantime, other divisions of Marines invaded Saipan and Tinian. Well, they were being met with pretty stiff resistance, and going was pretty slow. They were accompanied by some Army division also. But our Guam campaign was scrapped, and we were held then as a floating reserve for the reserve division for the Saipan and Tinian campaign. Well, the Marines got everything under control there, so we were sent back then, all the way back to Eniwetok, where we spent 3 or 4 weeks there until our Guam campaign was rescheduled and reprogrammed. So then in July of '44, we sailed on into to Guam and landed there. And we had heavy resistance in the landing on Guam. But when we landed there, we landed from the LSTs into the personnel vehicles called, at that time called alligators, instead of Higgins boats. And they got to the beach, then they could transfer gears and then climb right on it onto the sand. Once we landed there, I landed there with K Company, and with the company commander, our alligator hit the sand, the company commander thought that was it, period. He said, okay, everybody out, hit the beach. So we all started, and he was the first one over the side. Just at that moment that the operator of the alligator changed gears to traverse on up onto the beach, and he hit a landmine right at the point to where this captain had jumped, and it killed him instantly, and blew the track off of the vehicle. So we all piled out, at that point, and the staff sergeant, actually a platoon sergeant, he grabbed the map and the field glasses from the captain from his officer's pouch, and we headed on into the beach. And we had to take cover in bomb craters, behind fallen coconut trees, wherever we could find cover. And the Japs were up on the ridge, looking right down our throat. But by nightfall, we had gained a pretty good foothold, and had gained control of the top of that ridge by then. So, anyway, that was a nightmare.
I bet.
And that's when I lost my helper.
Oh.
He caught a mortar round. He was right in front of me. He was supposed to be behind me, but he darted in front of me, and just as the mortar round got him landed right at his feet.
For heaven's sake.
Knocked me out, knocked me stupid for a while. And I finally came to, and here my helper was laying across me, that he was dead.
How about your malaria?
Malaria, I had a recurrence of malaria later than on Guam. And I had another attack, but I could feel it coming on. So I enlisted help before it got too far. And with our treatment, the only treatment for malaria then was these huge quinine pills, and they were too big to swallow, so you had to cut them in pieces to get them down. Getting bitter, oh God, terrible taste. But anyway, we went on to finally secure the island. It was quite a battle for the airfield there, but we went on to take it. And when that battle was over is when I came down with that second attack of malaria. But by the time I came out of it and started looking for my outfit, the primary battle was almost over. It was just other skirmishes from that point on. So, but there was still a number of casualties took place, and still, scattered skirmishes. Anyway, we marched from there back down to the beach on the other side of the island to establish camp. And it was from there, it's when I got word that I was being sent back to the States to attend a program called V-12. That was a Navy designation for a program which gave the Navy and Marine Corps personnel, enlisted personnel, enrollment into academic classes for to gain enough units, enough credits to qualify for commission.
Guam, and you've kind of finished up that operation.
Yes, somewhat the combat operation was over. The island was officially called secured. And we, after a period of so-called R&R, we had guard duty at that time because of the possibility of other infiltration. And but my new partner, he and I, we had guard duty. We went out and manned a particular machine gun bunker, and upon certain assignments. So, but most of our operation was just relaxing. We our 2 bottles of beer a day ration that we were deprived of for so long caught up with us. So we were trying to
make up for lost time.
Yes, right, even the odds. So anyway.
We had talked earlier when you first mentioned Pearl Harbor back in 1941. You weren't absolutely sure where it was and that kind of thing. Had you ever heard of any of these places that you went to, any of these islands or anything like that before you got there? Or did you really know where you were?
Well, I had a general awareness just through studying geography in school. You know, I had a reasonable knowledge of the world map, so to speak. And as a matter of fact, I even established a code with my mother, who she subsequently lost, but I established a code with her. If I named a given name as a classmate, as an example, if I mentioned in a letter to her that the name Bob Sheets, who was a close friend of mine in high school, that meant that she was to look at a particular area, a particular island or her area, I was thereby letting her know where I was and I was located. And Bob Sheets, the name of, perhaps I don't remember for sure now, but maybe Formosa as an example. So I didn't have a name for New Zealand, but I wrote in one of the letters to her, I made mention of a particular racehorse by name, and who everybody in the horse society, so to speak, knew that horse was a New Zealand racehorse. That's how I was attempting to tell her where I was located.
Without getting it all blacked out.
Right, exactly. So, anyway, those were. I had a reasonable knowledge, I think, of different. Like Guam, I knew, but the Saipan and Tinian, those are new names for me. The Marshall Islands meant nothing to me.
Have you gone back since to any?
No, I haven't. I have wanted to. As a matter of fact, just last summer, my wife and I spent a few days down at Newport Beach with my wife. She goes there every summer for a family reunion. Well, I spent 2 days with her last summer down at the beach, and as I walked down the street along the beachfront and looked for a little coffee shop, for a donut shop and a cup of coffee, with a donut in hand. I'd finished my donut by this time, but with my coffee still in hand, I would set myself down on the top of a little brick planter out at the edge of the sidewalk, surrounding some type of tree. Two guys and a girl or woman, two young men and a young woman walk up, order their donuts and coffee, and I struck up a conversation with them. Well, lo and behold, we had discovered that we had been to Guam. They were Guamese. One of the guys was Guamese, and the other guy and his wife were Filipinos who had been employed on Guam. So that's where they had met. And in a conversation and explaining to them that I had been there during the war years, they said, "Gosh, you should go back now." They said, "You would be treated royally. They would give you a badge, and you would be considered a VIP. You would be they open their arms to you." So, well, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
You know?
That's interesting. I have a friend of my wife's was the Social Security Administrative Director at Guam for 8 years in the early 70s.
Oh, yeah.
And he said he was very high on the list. Any government official program he always got invited to. I mean, they treated them like you said, like royalty. He said it was a wonderful, wonderful assignment. And if it wasn't so far out in the middle of nowhere, but their children were born there and started school there. But he said, I just couldn't in good conscience raise them there entirely. So he left after 8 years. But he said it was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Yeah. Well, they explained to me this. Said you would be treated. They consider you as one of their liberators.
Yeah.
So anyway, I have searched some brief searching through the internet with the possibility of a trip to Guam, and I have learned that there are numerous resort hotels there today.
Yeah.
And it's very popular with the Japanese as a resort community. So they is a vacation destination.
Is there still any sense of feeling about the Japanese, or is that something you can put aside?
It is something that I have lived with for all these years. I've forced myself, I think, to somewhat resolve with myself the fact that I can't hold hatred any longer. However, in reading current readings of some of the atrocities that took place in those years, it brings back memories that it seems to rekindle certain hatreds. As a matter of fact, as an example, I read a short time back the book written by James Bailey, The Flags of Our Fathers.
Yes.
That brought back some bad memories for me, although they did not take place on Iwo Jima because I was not there. And now more currently, another book by him called Flyboys, which is a current book. And in reading through it, I haven't read the book, but browsing through it, I read also of atrocities. But I also am reminded of atrocities that I personally, I suppose you'd call it being guilty of myself through acts of hatred and personal contact with the enemy. War drives a person to the verge of insanity, I think. You conduct yourself in a very irrational manner. It's somewhat due to training, perhaps, but I think it's more of a animalistic instinct than anything else.
It's interesting, and I wonder if you would comment in talking with other Marines, perhaps, or other servicemen. Do you sense a difference between those who served in Europe and those who served in the Pacific? It seems to me, in talking to people that I've talked to, that same feeling doesn't exist in Europe.
That's my feeling as well. That's my deduction. It was more of a civilized war, Europe, than the Pacific War.
Well, and did the fact that the Japanese truly attacked the United States make it more personal for us than?
I think it did. I think definitely it did.
I think that's.
I think it just stimulated the desire to get even.
But I think your comment too that somehow Europe was more civilized.
That's my impression.
In spite of the Hitler
yes.
issues and that kind of thing,
Right.
the war itself was.
It was war fought as wars should be.
Yeah.
I didn't see any of the atrocities. I've never read nor heard of atrocities, atrocious acts with the Germans.
So when you you left Guam then and returned to the United States?
Yes, I was notified. We were in formation, we started retraining again for who knows where. Training exercise resumed, and one particular morning I was called out. We were in formation, marching down the company street, headed back up into the higher elevations of Guam, back into the more sparsely populated so-called areas. And the battalion adjutant came running out, said, "Cells, fall out. You're on 24-hour standby. You're headed back to the States." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He said, "There must be some other cells." Anyway, I turned to one of my other telephone guys behind me, and I said, "Millspaw," his name was, last name Millspaw. I said, "Millspaw, you take command." You know, I was the acting sergeant at this time, although just of corporal rank, but I said, "Take charge of the war section." So I fell out and step aside, and the company marches on past. So I go back to the battalion adjutant's tent down on the beach and ask him what it's all about. He said, "Well, I'm not sure exactly, but I just got word from regimental headquarters that you're on 24-hour standby to head back to the States. You've been selected to go back under the V-12 program." Well, I had never heard of V-12, and I had no idea what it was. And he said he wasn't absolutely sure himself, but he thought it was part of the Navy's, some academic training program, but he would look it up in his file. He remembered a memo on it. Well, sure enough, that's what it was. And so 3 days later, when the guys came back, marching back to camp here, I still was. Still there. And they, of course, questioned me. I told them I've already, turned in all my weapons, and have been relieved of duty. But still here. Well, as it turned out, a couple of weeks, or I don't think it was that long, but a week or so later, I was shipped back, sent back by truck down to the port on Guam, and placed aboard a ship there. Sent back to the States.
Did you go through Hawaii?
And I went to Hawaii. First time I had ever been to Hawaii. And I remember seeing Diamond Head, you know, and the view of Hawaii. God. And we got the ship docked in Hawaii. And all of the guys aboard mostly were Army. And there were a few of us, few Marines. And one guy and I befriended on the way back. But we, half of the guys, the troop complement, got liberty one day, and the other half the second day. And we got liberty starting about 10 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. And we went into Honolulu and had, first thing we did was get a big double dip ice cream cone. So, but they were rationed. And then a haircut. And then we headed for sights and then we headed for the upstairs parlors. But the lines were so long.
Didn't have time.
We didn't have time. We decided, well, at least if we play our cards right, we can get a good steak dinner maybe. So we hit the bar and restaurant, and on the way back to the bus loading depot, I walked by a shoe store, and I remember buying a pair of shoes, dress shoes. They were plain cap, plain toe, but just almost identical to military shoes. So I bought them, and I go back to the ship with a full stomach, and big smile, and a pair of brand new shoes. Oh boy, we ended up then in San Francisco on January 5th, 1945. Got a foggy morning, and it was the captain of the ship. It was an Army transport. And anyway, the captain announced the fact that we would be sailing under the Golden Gate Bridge, and we were standing out on the deck freezing in that dense cold fog, and suddenly directly above us, here was the old Golden Gate Bridge. Oh God, we were so thrilled.
I bet.
But it disappeared in the fog just as soon as it appeared. And anyway, we docked in San Francisco, and there was an ice cream vendor with a little cart out there with selling his Eskimo pies. Oh God. And there, as cold and shivering as we were, we bought more ice cream. Oh, from there we were transferred over picked up by a truck and taken across the bridge over to Treasure Island, just off Oakland, on the Oakland side. And we were there for about a week. And it was only because of the fact that I had bought those shoes that I could come up with somewhat of a dress uniform and get liberty while I was in San Francisco. Oh man!
So some things do work out.
A stroke of luck.
Yep.
But anyway, we boarded a train and shipped all the way across the country to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And that was a long, cold, miserable journey too. So we were there for a 30-day separation program. If we survived that 30 days, then we were on our way to a university of choice. So, well, having survived it, but we went through some pretty rigorous training. Further separate. It was for the purpose of separating guys, and some of the guys fell out of the program. But from there, I had selected USC as my choice of universities, only because of the fact that my mother lived in Los Angeles. And sure enough, I was assigned that school. So I had a 30-day en route leave from North Carolina to Los Angeles. So teamed up with another Marine who lived in San Diego. And we took a bus to Greenville, North Carolina. There was an Army Air Force base there, where it's actually, they flew DC-6s. It was hospital ships. They flew from Europe back to the country with the severely wounded personnel. And but we caught a DC-6, a pilot and a co-pilot had to get in so many flying hours a month. So this guy wanted to go to Kansas City, and he was from Kansas City. So he thought, well, he's got to put in, he had still a few hours to make up. So he was going to fly to Kansas City. We asked if we could go with him, fly with him. He said, sure. He said, we've got parachutes aboard here. He said, but you're going to have to strap on a parachute, you know. He said, have any of you guys jumped before? Either of you? He said, no, but we have had parachute training, which we had, just in North Carolina, just over there. And we had, you know, but from the training tower, we had dropped. But anyway, we landed in Kansas City, and couldn't get a flight out of there going west. And so we took the train, took a bus from the Air Force Base there to into downtown. Took the train from there to L.A. And we got there and still had quite a bit of time for liberty, you might say, before we had to report to school. But with a 30-day en route leave.
And this school was still part of the Marine Corps training program.
Yes, it was.
That you had attended to.
It's all under the Navy program, Department of Navy. Now, the Navy personnel received 8 semesters of training under that V-12 program. But the Marine Corps personnel received only 4 semesters of academic training. And that was enough to qualify for commission, or to qualify to continue on to officer training. So, but the war ended then. And now this, by the time we enrolled in school, it was March of 45. And having completed 2 semesters, and being in the third, now there were accelerated semesters in those years, 3 semesters per calendar year. And being in the third semester is when my enlistment was. The war ended in August, of course, 45. And then me having gone in as under a regular enlistment for 4 years, I continued in the program until the end of January of 46. And instead of shipping over into the reserves or extending my enlistment, the war was over. And I had no desire to make the military as a career. So I decided to accept my discharge and become a civilian again. And that was my stint in the military.
Briefly then, bring us up to date. You then...
then at that point,
as a civilian, decided to go back to school?
Yes, under the GI Bill. I wanted, by that time, I had all of my academic training, particularly, it was, the training was mandated under the V-12 program, was engineering. Well, my original declaration as a major was mechanical engineering. Back before, after following high school.
Mm-hmm.
I had a desire then, at that point, to become an architect, to design buildings. So I sought employment then as a junior draftsman, or even as an office boy,
Mm-hmm.
whatever I could find, following the war. But I applied to an architect's office in Los Angeles, and they could use an office boy, so to speak, particularly if it was an architectural student. They were very kind to students, but extremely kind to recent veterans. So,
Did you find that to be a common?
very, very common in those years. Yes, veterans seem to have be open, invited with open arms, so to speak.
As it should be.
It really certainly was.
Yeah.
Then, indeed, you're right.
So you went to work at this.
Yes, I went to work at an architect's office and enrolled, and also in a school of architecture at USC under the GI Bill. So I had to make certain manipulations, splitting classes with my employment, but my employer was very, very understanding. And under the GI Bill, there's also a program called it was a combination of academic and they call it on-the-job training.
Work related.
Yes. So anyway, it was the employer didn't have to pay me all that much because the government was paying me the other half. So I continued there and enrolled in School of Architecture and stayed with that office for 5 years. However, most of my time spent in that office was in their engineering department. They had a chief engineer, mechanical and electrical engineer, who wanted me in the worst way in his department. And he pulled every string he could to get me assigned to him on his projects versus the architectural end of it. So I got so irritated with that program after 5 years, I said, oh, to heck with it then. If that's the way it's going to be, then I'm going to go to work for strictly an engineering consulting firm. And I'll go back and finish my engineering, which I did. I left them and went to work for an electrical engineering consultant and stayed, and then transferred my academic endeavors back into engineering. So I went on to become an electrical engineer then years later after that. And a fellow employee who he and I became close friends. We both left this firm at the same time to start our own consulting practice, professional office, and we did that for years.
On the West Coast?
On the West Coast in Los Angeles. And we ultimately split and went our own ways. But ever since then, I've been an independent electrical engineering consultant. Even today, I get requests for.
How did you meet your wife?
We met through the same partner, the same individual who I befriended, and we worked together. He introduced me to bowling, the sport of bowling, and he had been bowling for a few years and really enjoyed the sport. And he was a member of the bowling team from another larger engineering firm located downtown Los Angeles, Parsons Engineering. And he was a member of one of their bowling teams. But when he left and came to work for this outfit to where I was employed, and after we met, he talked me into joining a bowling league and going with him on Wednesday nights and for bowling after work. That's when and where I met my wife. It was during that bowling league.
And what's her name?
Her name is Selma, S-E-L-M-A. No middle name, you know. She was born and reared in Massachusetts, Lowell, the city of Lowell, Massachusetts. Her parents, as a matter of fact, were both immigrants from the Near East. They're Armenians, you know, and her mother's family moved from Armenia. They were from in those years Constantinople, which is today Istanbul. They moved from there to France and lived there for her family. The balance of her family lived there until their death. But her father was so close to becoming a victim of the so-called genocide in the 1915 and 14 and 15 that he escaped and went to Liverpool, England, and his brother got as far as France. But anyway, from Liverpool, then he worked there for a while until he could earn enough to make the journey to America. So he came then from America, from Liverpool, and he met his wife through correspondence, an arranged marriage, so to speak, through photographs and letters and that type of thing. Anyway, she came here, and they became married and started their family here.
When did you and Selma marry?
We married in 1953.
Did you have a family?
Yes. 1 year later, we had our first child, a daughter, and 1 year following that, our son.
What are their names?
Our daughter is Gina, G-I-N-A, Gina Leanne. She's married, has 3 sons. Our son is John Jr. He's married, has 2 daughters, and but he has our daughter and her family. They live in Mission Viejo in Orange County, and my son and his family live in Smyrna, Tennessee. That's about 20 miles outside of Nashville. He's employed in Nashville. He also became an electrical engineer. So.
And how you now live in
Woodland
Hills?
Yes.
Semi-retired.
He's semi-retired.
That's good. That's a good way to be. You have a great story. We enjoyed hearing it. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap this up, or have I left out anything?
Well, I will add a brief comment.
Please.
That for the past, I think, possibly 11 or 12 years, there have been a few of the old Marines in my outfit and myself have been able to get together in a reunion.
Oh, wonderful.
And it's a 4 or 5 day affair once a year. It's started as every 2 years. But our ranks started becoming so thin,
Oh, yes.
we decided to make it yearly. Now this year, the burden is on my shoulders to arrange for the reunion, which I'm attempting to arrange for the city to meet in San Diego. And there are several things that are open for discussion, but there are quite a few things that may appeal to some of the older guys.
Mm-hmm.
There's an old aircraft carrier decommission. It's tied up there. I think we'd all enjoy seeing that.
I'm sure, yeah.
And we'll go to the Leatherneck Museum.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And we'll try to arrange a visit back up to Camp Pendleton, where we all trained.
Oh, yes, yes. Before they turn it all into suburbs or something else, yeah.
However, I don't expect more than 6 or 7 of us anymore to attend. At one time, there were, it must have been 15 or 16. Started when we first started out. But as I say, we all go.
Yes,
we all disappear.
Yes. And those numbers are dwindling rapidly, and that's why it's important to get these kind of stories now. And we certainly appreciate yours, and we treasure each one, and they add a great deal to what we do here.
Well, I'm in the midst of writing my own story.
Well, we wish you well, and certainly hope you get a chance to finish it.
No, thank you very much, Frank.
Thank you, sir.